Hi everyone, welcome to my channel. My name is Kristen, and here we explore an experiential approach to manifestation and spiritual awakening. So, in today's video, I want to talk about my personal opinion and perspective on the teachings of the law of assumption and why I don't agree that thoughts, beliefs, and assumptions create reality, and my stance that the law of assumption is a partial glimpse into manifestation, but not really a true understanding of how it really works. And I will also be deconstructing why I feel that the law of assumption is not really a law. So I just want to be clear, first and foremost, that I am not discrediting Neville Goddard's work or suggesting that it has no value. In fact, I think it does offer a very interesting exploration of consciousness and human potential. But I think that it's only a partial understanding of manifestation overall. When you read Neville's body of work in sequence, it to me it feels more like a record of one man's journey through awakening. It feels more like a personal account or an unfolding of his discovery over time rather than a gospel on how manifestation really works. In my opinion, what he calls the law of assumption can be more accurately thought of as an interpretive framework, not a universal principle or a law. So when we call something a law, we're speaking in absolute terms. If something is a law, then that means it's a fixed, non-negotiable principle that is woven into the fabric of reality and how it works. A law is universal. So it applies everywhere to every person with no exceptions or nuance. It's predictable because it produces the same results every time and it can be accurately measured. It's absolute in the sense that it doesn't require you to believe in it for it to even be true, and it doesn't fluctuate depending on your mood or thoughts. So, for example, gravity is a law because it never stops operating, and no techniques or belief system will stop it from working. So, if you jump off a building, you will fall. And it doesn't matter how spiritually enlightened you are, it doesn't matter how positive you feel, and it doesn't matter if you don't believe in gravity, it will still work the exact same way. In order for the law of assumption to actually be a law, it would have to fit this criteria, and it doesn't. It would have to be universal, predictable, non-negotiable, independent of your belief in it, and absolute. The law of assumption is not universal because the idea that your assumptions or beliefs are the sole cause of your reality, it's not true, and it can be easily observed and debunked quite quickly. Think of any situation where you expected a certain outcome and something different happened. So, for example, you had a really great job interview, you really thought you were going to get it, and then you hear back that you didn't. Or a friend is not responding to your text message, so you assume that they must be angry with you, and then you find out later on they just hadn't charged their phone. If assumptions truly created reality in that literal sense, you would never experience scenarios like that. What you assumed about the situation would always be true, no exceptions. You would never experience being surprised. You would actually have no concept of what it means to be surprised by something. You would have no concept of what it means to experience the unexpected or to be blindsided by something, because you would always know what was going to happen next because it would be your assumption. The law of assumption is not predictable. Two people could hold the exact same assumption, do the same techniques, and get completely different outcomes. And if it doesn't work, there's endless exceptions or explanations as to why the practitioner didn't get the results they want, that you have limiting beliefs, or you're in the wrong state, or you're not saying enough affirmations, or you're saying those affirmations wrong. So, in other words, it gets blamed on you when it doesn't pan out the way that you were expecting it would, which is another fallacy of the law of assumption. It's not predictable because things manifest at different times for different people. The timeline or the hour in which something manifests cannot be predicted. Now, if the law of assumption was an actual law, you would be able to predict exactly when the desire would manifest because it would be your assumption. So it would always be true. You would never be able to say the phrase, I thought I would have had it by now. The law of assumption is not non-negotiable. It doesn't override other laws of the universe. If it did, the mere belief that gravity is not real would actually stop it from working. It would mean that you could stop death or even resurrect someone back from the dead. Now, I know that in manifestation culture, some people do make these kind of claims, but there is absolutely no tangible evidence that anyone has ever manifested something like that. And if it was really possible, we'd be seeing it happen all the time. The law of assumption is not independent of belief. If something is a real law, it doesn't require you to believe in it, practice it, do any techniques to make it work, or even be aware of it at all. There are many people that don't believe or are unaware of the teaching that your assumptions create your reality. Yet they will still experience moments where they assumed or thought something that didn't match the outcome. If this was a real law, even the people that have never heard of it or just plainly don't believe in it would still see evidence that assumption creates reality. If the law of assumption was an actual law, it would mean that believing in Santa or the Tooth Fairy makes those things exist. It would mean that assuming you're invisible means no one can see you. It would mean you could become immortal and by thinking you will live forever. You would never experience anything unexpected or surprising because you would have assumed every single detail in advance. You wouldn't be able to understand the concept of being surprised because you would never have encountered being surprised. You would never feel uncertain about an outcome or how something's going to unfold because you would already know. And it would be correct every single time with no exceptions, whether you believed in the law of assumption or not. And you can verify this for yourself just by inquiring into your direct experience. So, for example, think about the following questions. Have you ever assumed something negative would happen and it didn't? Have you ever assumed something positive would happen and it didn't? Do you always know in advance exactly how every situation will unfold? Have you ever been surprised by the outcome of something? Before you learned about the law of assumption, did everything always happen exactly how you thought it was going to? Can you think of a time that something wonderful or amazing happened that you weren't expecting? Have you ever assumed that you would not be affected by something like aging or illness or loss, and then you were? Have you ever been blindsided by a big change in life that you didn't assume or predict? Have you ever learned something new that contradicted what you believed in before? If the law of assumption was absolute, would you ever experience something you didn't expect? If everything you assumed always came true, would you ever feel any genuine wonder or awe in life? If the law of assumption was really a law, If thoughts really created reality, every one of these questions would have to be answered no. If you answered yes to even one of them, it means that reality is more complex than the idea that your assumptions create all outcomes. And this is how we can self-inquire and use our own discernment, not necessarily accepting a teaching at face value or because it makes bold, seductive claims, but by examining it in the authenticity of your own lived experience. Does it ring to be true? So, for those reasons, I do not consider the teachings on law of assumption to be describing an actual law. And I think that although the teachings hint at the phenomenon of manifestation, I think they do provide a distorted picture. I believe that thoughts, assumptions, and beliefs do not create reality at all. They only show you something about your concept of self and who you believe yourself to be. They show you your embodiment. They show you the mental construct of the character you embody in this world, but they do not create reality itself, not in any literal way. They may shape your perception, but they do not cause reality, and there is a difference. Sometimes when we hear the phrase consciousness creates reality, we think that this means individual mind that is doing that, which is a solipsistic notion. The personal consciousness of the self is not creating reality. In fact, nothing is creating reality. Reality is already created. When we say consciousness, what we're actually referring to there is divinity or God or awareness or whatever word you like to use. Consciousness is reality. God, divinity, awareness is reality. It's not causing it, it is it. There is nothing causing reality. It just is consciousness itself. So my argument is that the phenomenon that we know as manifestation is not a law of cause and effect, and it's certainly not the law of assumption. I also feel that believing your thoughts are creating can be quite a harmful ideology, even when it's being taught with the best of intentions. When you believe that your thoughts create, you will start blaming yourself if things don't go the way that you assumed. You will think that you failed to think the right thoughts, and you will start holding yourself personally responsible for unwanted outcomes, including things that you have no control over, like the death of a loved one. You become obsessed with monitoring your mind to make sure that you aren't thinking anything negative, which not only is exhausting, it can ramp up your anxiety because you're trying to control or suppress something that is a normal part of the human lived experience. You're trying to control something that cannot be controlled. You start to believe that feeling sadness or any other unpleasant emotion will manifest negative things. And so you start suppressing your feelings or you start panicking when they arise. You start making your thoughts and your feelings a problem. You might even delay or avoid taking practical, grounded steps in your life, like applying for jobs or setting boundaries or studying for exams or walking away from an unhealthy relationship just because you think your thoughts alone can change these situations. When you believe that thoughts create, it gives you a false illusion of control. And you may even think that constantly monitoring your thoughts will mean that nothing difficult or unpleasant ever happens to you in your life, which is incredibly unrealistic. It can make you feel that you have to constantly perform positivity or a good self-concept in order to earn or deserve the life that you want the most. Believing that thoughts create can also reduce your compassion and empathy for other people because you will think that whatever difficulties that person is facing are just down to their negative thinking. And it can even go as far as victim blaming people for apparently creating their traumas. When you think that your thoughts are the cause of everything, you're more likely to stay in abusive or unhealthy relationship dynamics because you think that you created the abuse with your thinking. Over time, this school of thought not only sets you up for disappointment, but it creates a constant inner tension where you need to monitor and police every thought and feeling. And it often ends with burnout and a mental health crisis, which I would argue is very evident if you look at the online manifestation community as it is right now. It sells you the seductive promise of certainty, convincing you that if you just master the right assumptions, you can guarantee any outcome. And this is not true. This promise does not hold up even under the most basic scrutiny. If you look honestly at the community, you'll see a mixture of inconsistent results, long periods of no results, many people blaming themselves, and many cases of mental health and spiritual crisis. If nearly every student in a class was struggling to pass, we wouldn't blame the students. We would look carefully at the curriculum itself. Hope this helps.